cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of great storms to come. When Yvette Cooper unexpectedly and with moments to spare pulled out of media interviews this morning, I just knew that that cloud had arrived. And I'll be asking at 11 what more the police can do to make you feel like they represent everyone in this country. But the RPI figures are in. Ticket rises 3 times that of your wages. What will that mean to you? Will this be the straw that breaks the donkey's back? Well, you know, in 1994, I was sat in the tea room, the members' tea room, the one that's just been refurbished at the cost of several £1 million in the Palace of Varieties, and the swirl, the maelstrom of gossip, of speculation, of feverish activity was really, really something. And at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be recapping on those hours and days which changed the Labour Party forever. You won't want to miss it. In the first hour, though, I'm talking about these RPI figures. They're in, and as we've been saying this morning, from Liverpool Street Station and across the airwaves, when we have a situation that railway fares have risen 3 times faster than wages, and the privatised companies' profits have skyrocketed as a result, how long can that go in? I mean, an irresistible force and an immovable object have to mean a crash, a real political public relations crash. And I believe that we have reached that situation now. I talked yesterday, I hope powerfully, about the total absence of a case for the public subsidising private railway companies to make ever greater profits from ever higher fares, whilst running overcrowded and ever more unreliable services. I mean, that sounds to me like a kind of madness. We are subsidising these companies 3 times more than we ever subsidised British Rail that we actually owned. There can be no argument adduced in favour of that. Even the most right-wing supporter of privatisation cannot adduce an argument in favour of state-subsidised private profiteering of inferior services. And these figures that have been released do imply, and by the way, these figures are only on the regulated rail fares, and that's only 50% of the rail fares. Half of the rail fares in the country are not regulated in any way. And so this is a major national scandal. That's my point of view, and I want to hear yours. We are trending throughout the United Kingdom for most of yesterday's show, which was very gratifying. Whether you like me or you don't, whether you agree with me or you don't, I hope that you'll accept that this is where the argument takes place. This is leading Britain's conversation. We heard this morning on the news of people paying thousands. In fact, some people paying more for their commute than for their mortgage. In the outer London area, and those commuting from towns around London, we've reached crisis point. And this links to the housing crisis in London. Why? Well, you can either have mass house building in London so that the people who work in London, who we need to work in London, can actually live in London, or you have to ensure that those living outside and travelling in to work in vital jobs, police workers, fire service workers, health service workers, teachers, really essential workers. If they can't afford to live in London, they have to be able to afford to travel into London. And here we have literally the worst of both worlds. We have a chronic shortage of housing, eye-watering rents and mortgages, and increasingly unbearable railway fares. So my question is, with a ticket increase 3 times that of your wages, and that's just over the last 5 years, by the way, what will another ticket increase mean to you? Mohammed's on the line in Skipton. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Good morning, George.
Morning.
So, what I don't understand is we had in our kind of political narrative for 2 or 3 years the argument about should we press ahead with HS2 or not, a huge infrastructure project which would have cost, well, probably around 50 billion. So why is it that we're saying that an infrastructure project like that, which would be so economically beneficent and so on, and just purely to boost economic growth, but then no one can actually afford to actually take these train fares? The idea is that you have to have investment in public infrastructure to increase economic growth, but this is a public service, this is infrastructure, and no one can actually afford the train fares. The train fares where I live, when I was a kid, admittedly I was paying half fares. We used to pay £3.50 for me to go to Leeds. It's now £10.50 off peak for me to get a return ticket.
Wow.
As an adult. So I mean, I know that, so that if you did it directly, then it's gone up from £7 to £10.50, which is farcical.
Well, we have you called it a public service. Of course, it's only half a public service. The costs are public, the profits are private. The railway belongs to us. Actually, Mrs. Thatcher envisaged the entire thing being in private hands, but the track, the infrastructure, belongs to us. Of course, without the track, the private companies have nothing to run on and couldn't possibly afford to build their own track. So they're using our track that our fathers and mothers, and in my case me, paid for over many decades. We led the way in the world on railways. We were the first railways. Railways are the obvious answer to congestion, to high energy prices, to all the travails of travelling by road. And so we ought to have continued to be the world's leader on railways. Instead, almost everybody's railway is better than ours. And now we have a situation where the private companies in the unregulated part of the market, which is 50% of it, 50% are unregulated. The private companies can charge what they like. And you've just given us an example of what things are like in travelling to Leeds. Mohammed, Leeds and the northern powerhouse of Manchester are going to benefit from HS2. The question is, are they going to benefit enough to justify the gigantic price tag? And would that kind of money be better spent on other parts of the infrastructure, isn't it?
Naturally. I mean, if you're talking about that kind of price tag, you can't sit there and equate the economic benefit of 50 billion to people actually being able to... For example, both my parents work in Leeds, and they used to take the train, and they haven't been doing for the last 5 years. They drive in, which going through all the traffic, and I'm sure there are many others who are also in the same situation.
We're talking about the railways. Now, let me give you some important facts. Rail passengers will face average season ticket price rises of 1% in January following the announcement of the July inflation figures. The new year rises are based on the previous July's rate of retail price index, that's RPI, about which more later, inflation, announced by the Office for National Statistics. It will be the lowest rise since 2010, when fares actually decreased by 0.4. But Action for Railway says season tickets and other regulated fares have increased by 25%, while average pay went up by 9%. So we're still being hit in the pocket just for going to work. Who do you believe? Do you believe Action for Railways? Or do you believe the privatised companies? Or do you believe the retail price index, about which I'm going to dilate further? Now, don't forget, you can't only... Wags says, answer me this, will train fares go down if the government run it? No, they they won't. Well, actually, Wags, yes, they will. Because the government is forced by the people to take the broader view. This is the difference between economics and accounting. If you take out the private profit element that the private companies would no longer be making if we again owned the railways, the state would take a view of the relative balance in the cost of people travelling on the railways as opposed to on the roads, people travelling into London to work as opposed to having to build houses for them here in London to live in. The broader economic picture would be weighed in the balance by the government. Paul says, as a family, we now see train journeys as a luxury, and the thought of packed carriages and bad service keeps us in the heavily taxed car. Well, if I'm travelling with my family, admittedly I have a very large family by the grace of God, I wouldn't dream of going on the train. It would be ludicrously, hopelessly uneconomic to do so. By the grace of God, I have a big car for my big family. And I have to travel any distance at all. I do it by car. I only travel by rail if I'm travelling myself, because it's simply uneconomic to do otherwise. Now, Steve's right, I promise you, that's what he calls himself on Twitter, Steve ''S' right, capital R-I-G-H-T, says if you can't afford the train fare, get a local job. Sorted. Not quite, Steve. Roy, go ahead.
Yes, George. Years ago, within the last 20 years, the Metropolitan Police and the NHS used to have section houses and cheap accommodation for nurses and police officers, usually based where they were working. This has been taken away in the last 20 years, and now all these essential workers are forced to live right outside the capital and travel in each day. It's when you're working on sociable hours, it makes it far more difficult if you finish at 2 o'clock in the morning to get home if you're relying on train services because they're stopped. And in order to do this, the various agencies, the police and the NHS, sold off those accommodation blocks to make large flats for, and sell them off at a vast profit. But the people that got penalised were the actual workers.
Well, I mean, there's land right opposite St Thomas's Hospital in London, where many of my children were born, which has been turned into luxury flat accommodation. Why wasn't that used for accommodation for the workers in the hospital? Isn't that sensible? It's not left-right. Isn't it just common sense?
Well, it is, but it's been gradually eroded over the last 20 years, so that now there aren't there isn't any accommodation for probationer, police officers or student nurses. They have to find their own, and it's not cheap.
Well, much that was good about our country has been eliminated in the last 20 years. I'd say 30 years, maybe even a little more than that. But when I was a kid, there were always a clutch, very nice they were too, of semi-detached houses, which were known ubiquitously as police houses. And they were reserved for police officers who we needed to live near where they worked. It's kind of not rocket science. Roy, thanks for the call. George is on the line in Ealing. Go ahead, George.
Good morning. Listen, first of all, I have to tell you, I'm an old man. I benefit from Ken Livingstone's free travel pass on the Underground, and that takes me to...
the Freedom Pass.
Freedom Pass. That takes me out of London to Zone 6. So when I go on the railway, some of the railway journeys have already been paid for by that. I also buy a third off old people's card once a year for 30 quid. And I'm able to travel off-peak, and so I get a good deal. I want to make that clear. And secondly, I am in favour of renationalising the railways, in spite of the fact that it might end up me paying slightly more. But nevertheless, I want to put to you, George, the the case or the reasons that people who are in favour of privatisation often put to the public, because I'd like you to deal with them, because I'm fearful nobody else will put this to.
Okay, go ahead.
Firstly, this is number one, and there are 4 points. Number one is that the people who use the railway are the people who should pay for it, and it isn't reasonable for the taxpayer, many of whom never or rarely use the railway, to pay the full cost. What do you say to that?
Well, if we took that to its logical conclusion, only those who had children would pay for our schools, only those who were ever sick would pay for our NHS, and so on. You can't run a society like that because, of course, even if you have no children, you are going to be dependent, as you and I will be when we get even older, George, on other people's children. We need children. We need educated children. We need educated children to look after us. We need educated children to work for us, to serve us. So we need educated children, whether or not we have children or not. Secondly, even though we are rarely sick, in my case, very rarely sick, virtually never off work, no one knows what lies ahead tomorrow or even this afternoon. And if we haven't made a contribution to the building of a national health service in the course of the time that we were not sick, there will not be an NHS for us when we do become sick. And of course we have old mothers who need healthcare. We need healthcare for our children, including emergency healthcare sometime. So that kind of argument, nihilistic, I am an island kind of approach, just doesn't work, neither morally nor practically. You know, George, because you're old and wise, that no man is an island. Am I right?
George, I've got to get on to the second point, and your answer is going to have to be shorter, I think, otherwise you're going to cut me off. The second point that they make quite often is that there are more people than ever using the railway. The numbers of people using the railway keeps going up, and it has gone up consistently since privatisation. Why is that the case if fares are so unaffordable and the experience is so dreadful?
Well, first of all, our population keeps going up. The extent to which, because of house prices, our families are scattered where once they lived in proximity to each other requires us to travel. And of course, people have no choice. You can't say, I'm not going on the train because the service is so poor and so expensive. If you're commuting in from St. Albans, you can either be in a motorway queue once you get to the motorway, or you can stand on a train whilst paying thousands of pounds a year for the privilege. Can you imagine starting your working day standing on a train for which you've paid an ever higher amount of money? George, I'm sorry for my loquaciousness, that I spoke too long, because you correctly predicted that I would then have to cut you off. See, I'm asking about the price increases in rail fares and what they mean to you. How will it mean being hit in the pocket again with the increase announced today? And I'm asking, when will the straw be the last one? Now, you can also, as I say, tweet me, and several are. Paul Healy says, stop commuting by train and go by motorcycle. Instead, I saved over £3,000 per year. That's one solution, though not everybody can don the leathers and get on top of the Norton or the Triumph, if they even still exist, and roar into London from the dormitory towns around us. London has been turned into a cesspit by politicians, immigrants, and corporate thieves. It has nothing in common with England, says someone resounding in the rejoicing in the splendidly English name of Paul O'Rourke. And James in Harrow says, what about having several companies operating on the same route? Would that force train companies to lower prices and be competitive? No, we need longer trains. We need longer platforms. We need better maintained track and other infrastructure. That's the problem. Even the German-owned trains don't run on time. in England. And of course, Germans are famous for making trains run on time. The reasons are trackside, the reasons are electrical, the reasons are problems with safety and all the rest of it. We need public investment in subsidised fares, longer platforms, longer trains, and better main-trained track and other infrastructure. That's what we need. And we need to stop treating the railway workers as if they were the enemy within. Danny has from Euston. They must know about railways in Euston. Go ahead, Danny.
I do. I'm a railway enthusiast for most of my life. Anyway, I was going to say about the mainly I phoned up about the overcrowding on the trains, the length of trains and the platforms. Just before I do, the chap phoned up earlier on about the Met poll about Emma workers. Now, the Metropolitan Police used to get a travel allowance within 90 miles of London.
They've still got a travel allowance. I don't know how many miles it covers.
Yeah, well, they reduced it to 50, and then they changed it again. I don't know, because I'm not up on it these days.
I think they're stopping it for new entrants, but the existing officers are still getting it. I don't know the exact details.
Yeah, I thought they already had. Anyway, don't forget the other thing in Paris, of course. There used to be a system whereby any workers in Paris were subsidised by their employees. And, of course, they have SNCF, who nationalised in 10 years before us. They still have a nationalised, what's name?
And a very good service it is, too.
I know it is. I've travelled on it, and DB and DR. In the days of Deutsche Reichsbahn, I travelled on it in Berlin and East Germany in the 70s. But the point of the matter is this, about overcrowding. About HS2, they're saying, oh, we need HS. We don't need it, George. We need it like a hole in the head. I live in Drummond Street here. The idea is to rebuild Euston Station yet again. How many more times? Yeah. We had this in the 60s. Don't forget, Euston's only dates from 68 when it was brand new. Yeah. And anyway, so they want to knock down this 68 building here, pull this up here, and then put a new Euston. Now, apart from that,
what? So Drummond Street will disappear?
Well, that's the idea.
Oh my goodness! It's one of my favourite streets. I was just going to say how lucky you are living in Drummond Street. It's a great street, great restaurants.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, the point of the matter is about the overcrowding, right? Now, they complain that private racketeers, you call them privateers, I call them racketeers, that they're overcrowded, and they moan and groan how terrible it is they receive complaints about overcrowding. Now, when I was a youngster, and you probably remember this as well, the trains were much longer. This was in the days of steam. Yeah. When the diesels came, the days of steam, the average length of a mainline train was 14 cars long. Then they went down to 12 when the diesels came in, etc. And then they went down to 10 in 66. And they got shorter and shorter. Since privatisation, not only have the trains got shorter and shorter themselves, of course, they shortened all the platforms, didn't they? Yep. Because they wanted to make the stations shopping centres, not railway stations.
That's exactly right.
And so what I'm saying is, and now there's a thing whereby these private racketeers, they have to pay more for each car they had on those trains. Yeah. So those trains are going to get, as you say, there's more people travelling on the train because of a larger population. And some chap said earlier on, why are people travelling on the trains? Because we haven't got any choice, mate. What else can we do?
Danny in Euston, our correspondent from the age of steam. Thank you for that tour de force, tour de horizon. Steve's in Colchester. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what I want to talk generally about. This is called the government con. Now, the government will have you believe that privatisation equates to lower taxation by cutting public subsidies. Do you agree with that so far?
Yes.
And with that, the lower taxations will mean that gets them more votes because they're cutting taxes, effectively income tax, whatever.
Well, I personally think that zeitgeist has changed now.
But I think
people realise that no taxation equals no civilization. If you want no civilization and no taxation, go and live in Somalia.
I think people vote for that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, as with privatisation, if something goes horribly wrong, and it has gone horribly wrong in the railways since privatisation, ministers have responsibility, but the key is they don't have accountability. And the key is to get accountability back into ministerial control, so they have a bigger watch on the railways. And in reality, train journeys are a tax. In the southeast, people have to travel into London by a train. There's no other means to get there. So when the government sell this big con that, by privatising, this is costing the public purse a lot less, well, de facto, it becomes a tax to the commuters.
Yeah.
And the only people that are going to benefit from the train fares going up exponentially are the top 1% of earners within the railway train operating companies. That's the reality.
It is. Steve, thanks. I need to press on only because there are so many people trying to get through. The ticket increase over the last 5 years has been 3 times that of wages. And what will another ticket increase mean to you? That's my question in the first hour this morning. Joe's in Chester on that. Go ahead, Joe.
How are you doing, George?
By the grace of God, I'm good, thanks. Go ahead.
Great. Why would you think that ministers would go ahead with a deal called HS2 that's going to cost, in the long run, in excess of about £50 billion to the UK taxpayer?
Well, if we had the odd £50 billion and we had fixed everything else, I'd be in favour of HS2. But as we don't have the odd £50 billion and we haven't fixed hardly anything else, I'm against it.
OK. Well, I'm completely against it. I'm pretty much almost completely against any privatised company or, that's got contracts with, public services, effectively, like the NHS and the armed forces with Capita. I mean, the only reason that I can see that ministers are pushing forward to grant huge companies that are taken from public services is that they're probably rich friends of these MPs, or they've probably grown up with them, or they're probably receiving something on the backhander and having it paid off in the likes of City of London. That's the only logical explanation. I mean,
well, it's not the only logical explanation, but it's an explanation that is truer today than it ever was in Britain. Britain was once, indeed for most of my life, could have been described as one of the least corrupt countries in the world. But that's less true than it was. Thanks for the call. Tom says, Met Police now have to contribute towards the rail allowance. It's not free. Tube and bus are free. The rise means nothing to me. I stopped using trains years ago due to inflated prices. Newcastle to London equals remortgage. OK, the ticket increases 3 times that of your wages over the last 5 years. What will another ticket increase mean to you? That's the question I'm asking in the first hour. In the second hour, coming up at 11, I'll be asking what more the police can do to make you feel like they represent everyone in this country. As Northampton police make officers say sorry to people they wrongfully stop and search, is this a welcome start, or is it not enough? We were trending yesterday. It's a bit too much to expect that we'll trend 2 days in a row, but it's looking busy, so if you want to communicate that way, please do. We're talking about railways. We talked about them yesterday and we're talking about them today because it really is a very significant part of our national life, and it is the area where the chickens of privatisation are coming home to roost, more dramatically perhaps than anywhere else. Just to sketch it out, every one of you used to own all of Britain's railways, track and rolling stock, and stations and infrastructure, and potential land banks connected to that infrastructure. Then a very few of us owned it because Sid mentioned that we could buy it in the great privatisation bonanza. Even fewer of us held on to our shares, and now those shares are largely owned by hedge funds, by big business, and increasingly by foreign companies. Now, it's come to something when Britain's railways, which paved the way for the world, You could say we were the vanguard of railway development, are now owned by a tiny handful of privateers, buccaneers, or racketeers, as a caller called them, though that's probably a bit too pejorative, and increasingly foreign companies. And of course, the chickens come home to roost every time the fares go up. Every time you get on the train, having paid a very high fare for it, and find that you can't have a seat, because the trains are ever smaller, because the platforms are ever smaller. And when you complain, they shrug and say, there's nothing we can do about it, Gov. That's if you can find someone from the company involved that will take responsibility for your complaint. And increasingly, that's not easy to do. So, with a ticket increase 3 times that of your wages over the last 5 years, what will another ticket increase mean to you? Here's Fred in Bexley. Fred, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hello, great show, George.
Thanks, pal.
I'd like to say I've been listening to all the comments, and I think they're very good. But can I just say one thing, and that is, when I was a young man back in the 70s, someone gave me a book called The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist.
A very, very great piece of work. I recommend it to everyone.
And I think if you read that, it gives you an insight. And considering this is over 100 years old, it gives you an insight in how, and in simple layman's terms, it explains everything. And I would highly recommend it to people leaving school.
It's called A Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist, and the author is Robert Tressel, who was buried in a pauper's grave in Liverpool, I think, although a proper headstone has now been provided, courtesy of the Transport and General Workers Union, as was. Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, and I think it got, when I was reading it, it was banned. I mean, I know a lot about the book because I was so interested in it. It was banned until the 30s. The government banned it. And they say that the Labour government that came into power after the Second World War was highly sort of, that was one of the main reasons they got in, because of the book was so widespread. And I think it's now the time to blow the dust off it and for the young'uns to start reading it again.
Yeah, I'm going to do an audio version of it. Thanks, Fred, in Bexley. David is in Primrose Hill. Go ahead, David.
Shalom, salam. I haven't spoken to you for a couple of years, George.
Okay, shalom, salam to you, and good morning, too.
Yes, and when Mrs. Thatcher got rid of the miners, she left the area totally decimated, but she put loads of money, tax-free incentives, into Canary Wharf. If you wanted to cut rail journeys down, why didn't they make tax-free areas where she decimated them? All these areas where people have to come into London as a central hub creates more congestion, housing prices go up and everything else. It should be less centralised. There should be tax incentives for people to come in. You know, it's the carrot that drives the donkey.
Well, thanks for that, David. Good to speak to you again. David in Enfield texts, it's an offence to drive a car without wearing a seatbelt, but thousands of commuters have to stand crammed into high-speed commuter trains into London. What about public safety? What a very powerful point. David in Enfield. I don't know the answer to that, but I think we should get one. Mills of Ashted says we will roll over and allow rail ticket prices to soar, just like we do when petrol prices go sky high. And Richard from Forest Hill says it's a pity the politicians can't repatriate the railways back into public hands. After all, we all pay for it. Well, of course, the politicians can, if they have the bottle to do so. And Wags, again, I think, train fares are too high. They never go down. But £20 return from CMK to Euston with travel card is reasonable. And George, you know as well as me, whether it's nationalisation or privatisation of Anyway, if they don't want it to work, it won't. Not sure who the they in these kind of communications actually is. Let's hear from David in Chigwell, who has a contrary view, which is always welcome. David, go ahead.
I was listening to your description on how the railways are now, which fit in exactly how the railways were under the government when they had the government-run railways. We had dirty trains. We had trains that didn't run on time. We had overcrowded trains. We had everything that, apart from the price, everything that we have now, we had then.
And we still have it. We still have it now. But you agree with me to that extent, David? We still have it now, yeah?
The only thing that I agree with you is the pricing structure. But the rest, if it goes back to government run, we're going to have exactly as we have now, which, apart from the pricing, surely that's not a way for improvement. Surely it would be better for the government to look at what we have now with the privatisation and set in a price structure that would be which would be acceptable to all, but still keep the improvements which are far better than they were.
Well, of course, if we nationalised it now, David, we'd be nationalising what we have now. We would not be nationalising what we had before privatisation.
No, no. But the one problem is that once back into government hands, the government do not have the experience to run the railways.
No, that's not true, because the government, David, the government wouldn't be running the railways. Professional managers would be running the railways.
The only problem is, like professional police are running the police, the government would set the budgets.
Yes, they would. They would set the budgets, and it's the budgets I want to turn to, if you'll forgive me, because I only have a couple of minutes to do it. First of all, you're wrong in your memory. You're talk about rose-coloured glasses. You're looking back through very dark glasses indeed to the time of British Rail. The trains were much longer, as our correspondent from the Age of Steam just explained to you. There were far longer trains operating from far longer platforms. So overcrowding, standing on trains, high-speed trains, was not the case before privatisation. Now, partly it's that there are far more people, partly it's that there are far faster trains. But it's undoubtedly true that there were many things wrong with the old British Rail, though actually, at the time we privatised it, those things were getting better and better. Catering, for example, is one very good example. The catering on British Railway trains, the breakfast on British Railway trains, had reached its apogee just before it was privatised. But we'd be nationalising what we have now. And the government, the Parliament, through public pressure, would be making investment in the railway for the interests of the broader economy and the broader society. We don't need to pay anything. We just take these services back as their franchises run out. We just don't renew their franchises. So, bit by bit, as we could have done starting with the East Coast Main Line, bit by bit we take the railway back into public ownership. And I believe that you'd see the difference. But if there was no difference, you'd be able more effectively to bring the government to heel than a German company or than a privateer who doesn't have to worry about what you think at all. But the knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. And MPs have to concentrate their mind every 5 years, or they're going to end up out of work. It's not about political correctness. It's not about health and safety gone mad. It's not about any of those things. It's not about trying to humiliate the police in any way. Only a madman would want to do that. We all depend on the police. But I'm here to tell you, as someone who has represented, and in a broader sense still represents, the people who are far more likely to be stopped and searched than someone with blue eyes and a white face like mine, it is such an invasive, such a violating experience that it makes people hate the police. You better join in. George Galloway on LBC. Now, that's my point. You see, it's not anything to do with political correctness. It's everything to do with social cohesion. Because you don't need to be Einstein to work this out. If the people are alienated from the police, they're much less likely to be cooperative with the police. They're much less likely to be a bank of information and intelligence that the police can use to fight crime, to fight terrorism, to fight all kinds of crime. You are 26 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you've got a black face. And if you've got a black face and a Muslim beard, well, I think you're off the arithmetic scale. In Dorset, I think it was, last week, where there's only 2,200 black people, they were 16 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people in Dorset. That means if you're black and living in Dorset, you might as well come out the door with your hands up. Now, given that these stops and searches almost never lead to a conviction for any crime, we need to stop and search again to determine whether this policy is more trouble than it's worth. Now, I think if the stop and search experience was less brutish, and trust me, if you're black and down on the street, it is overwhelmingly an unpleasant experience, leading to this alienation I'm talking about, if it was less brutish, if it involved an apology after the stop and search, as it invariably does, yields no evidence of any criminal activity, then that might just go a little way. Maybe Northampton is leading the way in this. Now, Lord Brian Paddick knows a thing or two about policing. He's a former Deputy Assistant Commissioner in London's Metropolitan Police Force, as it was once called, Police Service, as it's now called. Lord Paddick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George.
Can I call you Brian?
Of course you can.
Brian, where do you stand on this? You know, as I do, the experience of particularly minority ethnic communities in London, but also young people more generally. It's a bruising experience being stopped and searched, isn't it?
Well, as you, I think, as you just said, it can be a well-managed experience. I'm not going to go as far as to say it's a positive experience. I mean, being searched by the police is never going to be something that anybody would want to subject themselves to. It is, if it is used properly and intelligently, a useful crime-fighting tool. But where, and I think, I'm not sure where you're getting your numbers from, but I think on average, again, totally unacceptable, but on average, when you're 8 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're black than if you're white, clearly something is going wrong in terms of the way that the police are using this. And maybe, and I think it's been suggested before but never been put into practice, this Northamptonshire approach, where if officers are deemed to be using the power of stop and search inappropriately, they get that power taken away from them, albeit only temporarily while they undergo remedial training, then maybe that's the way to go.
Is it race? You say 8 times, I say 26. I've always used 26, but if I'm wrong, I want to correct myself. But even if it's 8 times more likely if you're black, I think by another factor, if you're Muslim, if you're black and Muslim, you're more likely to be stopped and searched. Does that come down to canteen culture, racism on the part of the ordinary copper? Or is it because they're more likely to find something on such a person?
Well, I think there are very few police officers who hate black people to the extent that they want to go out and inconvenience them because they don't like black people. But what there is a wrong stereotyping of black people as criminals. And so this is why I think a lot of police officers really resent being accused of being racist when they racially profile people to stop and search, because as far as they're concerned, they're not stopping black people because they're black. They're stopping black people because they equate blackness wrongly with criminality. They think they're stopping criminals. In fact, they're racially stereotyping black people as criminals. That's, I think, why you get this 8 times disproportionality. Now, of course, you can accuse the police of all sorts of misconduct, of all sorts of things, but the thing that you can't do is call them racist.
But that is racist, Brian. If you're stereotyping black people as criminals, that's racism.
What I'm saying is, this is the attitude of senior police officers. They will defend to the hilt their officers against an allegation of racism, whereas, as you say, racially stereotyping black people as criminal is a form of racism. And the problem is, until police chiefs acknowledge that there is a problem regarding racism, they won't deal with the problem. Now, we've got a police and crime commissioner here in Northamptonshire, somebody who oversees the police force, not a police officer, who is forcing this on senior police officers. And this is what we've needed for a very long time, because politicians have not put pressure on chief police officers to deal with this issue of 8 times proportionality. And without that political pressure, the police will not act. And I think this police crime commissioner should be commended for what he's doing.
Yes, I think so, and they may be blazing a trail for others. The problem, I mean, the current commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Bernard Hogan-Howe, he acknowledged just a week or two ago that the Met still has a problem with race. We know that Macpherson found that institutionalised racism was a real problem in the Metropolitan Police Force. I never met a senior police officer who wasn't a civilised, intelligent, you'll probably tell me I've met the wrong ones. Never met a police officer who wasn't a civilised, intelligent person who knows that it would be madness to have a police force that was imbued with racist feelings and intent. I suppose what I'm asking you is, has that reached the streets?
Well, I just think that senior police officers are walking this tightrope between wanting to do something to eradicate this disproportionality in stop and search, but not wanting to admit racism in the ranks and thereby undermine or further undermine public confidence in policing. And unfortunately, my view is, and always has been, that you need to be, as a senior police officer, open and honest, not just about the good things the police do, but about the mistakes that the police make and the problems that you have within the service. And you've got a different mindset amongst many senior officers who believe that you need to defend the police against accusations, because if you don't do that, you undermine public confidence and therefore you undermine the ability of the police to police, because the police rely on, as you say, members of the community coming forward with intelligence. I mean, if the black community had more confidence in the police, they would come forward and tell the police who it is who is carrying the knives, so that the police could accurately target those individuals. But because there is this distrust, not least because of stop and search, they won't come forward. They won't cooperate with the police.
Well, we had it for very different reasons in the north of Ireland, didn't we? That in the nationalist community, in the Roman Catholic population of the north of Ireland, it was absolutely taboo to deal with the police. No one would go to a police officer or tell a police officer anything because they were entirely alienated from them. Now, there are communities in London and elsewhere who regard the police as a kind of occupation force.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Lord Paddock, a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. I know you're far away, probably on holiday, but maybe working, and I'm grateful to you for your time. I realise it's a hot potato, but we have to pick up hot potatoes now and again, and that's what I'm doing now. Your thoughts on stop and search on the Northampton Police Initiative, saying that it's never too late to say sorry. Well, the cat is amongst the pigeons, so to speak. I'm talking about stop and search. And Jason has tweeted, the stop and search statistics paint a picture that mainly black and brown people carry contraband, which is false. Gary Lee says no, illegal anything is illegal. That's a kind of non sequitur, Gary, I think we call that. Most knife crime is committed by black people, says Nick in Cambridge. If black people want better relations, then they shouldn't give the police a reason to stop them. Oh, Nick, you're in Cambridge. Why not absorb some of that intellectual learning atmosphere in your city? I think you might realise that that is just poppycock. Police Scotland carry out a huge amount of stop and searches, and probably not mostly black faces, as you suggest, says Joanne Henry. Well, that's because there aren't many black faces in Scotland. Wags says, surely if green people did most of the crimes in an area, they would be stopped the most. Actually, in my experience, the Greens are a very peaceful, non-violent community. The Asian gang that used to beat up single white guys in Pollock Shields never got searched or even investigated until they murdered a 15-year-old boy by stabbing him with screwdrivers and finally setting him on fire while still alive. And it's the police in Glasgow that are despised, says Paul in Paisley. Well, I don't think the police in Glasgow are despised. They certainly oughtn't to be. And an Asian gang murdering someone is every bit as despicable as any other kind of gang, though I suspect that anonymous texter has an agenda here. And a texter says, I wonder why only black people are stopped and searched. We saw a black guy on TV last night who said he was making £1,000 a week selling illegal items from the boot of his car, etc., etc. Just goes to show that sort of audience doesn't switch off just because I'm on the radio. The last time I was at a car boot sale, everybody was white. Jason in Chiswick is on the line. Let's hear from him. Jason, go ahead.
Hi, George. Some interesting, just to comment on some of those messages. I mean, the chap from Cambridge, that you could dismiss it as poppycock, but then you could also have the view to say that do many people in that intellectually benefiting area think like that? And if they are thinking like that, depending on his background, Cambridge, you then think, well, if he is, and we'll assume, he could potentially be one of the people that in the future could be making decisions on our behalf. So that's an interesting thing.
Yep.
The other thing that I wanted to mention was the apologies. Fantastic idea or thought that the police could consider, but I think by doing so, by giving an apology, even if it was only verbal, it would only go some of the way. Then, for instance, let's just say that the police force wrote a letter to individuals that were stopped and searched over a period and apologised. It didn't come to fruition. There was no conviction, but then that would mean that some individuals would have a number of letters that they could then approach for compensation because I've now can prove that I've been stopped a number of times over a period. That would happen if most of the people being stopped and searched knew their rights. But given the fact that we're talking about probably quite young people, probably anything from 11 to 19, 20 that get stopped the most, and obviously older people as well, a lot of people don't know their rights with the police, which is why a lot of campaign organisations try and give you pamphlets to say these are your rights if you're being stopped and searched.
Yeah.
So if you don't know your rights, you will never get a record of your search, and the police will just hide it. Because we stopped and searched you, it's fine, we'll let you along your way.
Well, I just can't see why anyone would object to this scenario. A police officer stops and searches you, finds nothing illegal on you, finds no evidence of any criminal intent on you, and says, I'm very sorry, sir, to have stopped and searched you. You're free to go on your way with my apology. Why would any sane person object to that, Jason?
Well, I don't think it's a mark of sanity. It's just a mark of your environment and your upbringing. Now, we say that the police may have inherent racism within their ranks. You don't just racism doesn't just jump into your.
Well, there's no need to insert. It's polite of you to insert the word "may," but there's no need to, because we already have the judgment of Macpherson that racism on the street amongst some officers is present.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that if that is the case, then what the majority, and I can't say all, the majority of police officers that stop someone that don't find anything, the thought that they have is, I'll get you next time, as opposed to, you didn't do anything and you're innocent, which it should prove.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a cycle of, well, we just didn't catch him this time. Next time, stop him, we'll get him with something, which is what creates this circle of minorities being stopped more so than others, especially when there's less in the population.
Good point, Jason. Well made. Now, Katie Hopkins, the co-host of Rolling His R's on LBC, I'm going into the studio to lamp the commie git. Well, come and have a go, Katie, if you think you're hard enough. We're talking about stop and search. We're talking about the need to say sorry when you've stopped and searched someone and you were wrong to suspect that they were worthy of being stopped and searched. Seems to me just common decency, though quite a few people on the board and in the texts and tweets seem to have a problem with that. Let's find out further why that might be. Stella is in Chelmsford. Stella, welcome.
Oh, hello. I really think that police have a very hard job.
They do.
If the stop and search statistics are cross-matched against suspects wanted in the area, would that make a difference?
Yes. Look, policing should be intelligence-led, Stella.
Yes.
You should have a reason to believe that this person should be stopped and searched. And it cannot be because of the colour of their skin. But the statistics, whether it's 8 times or 26 times, more likely if you're black, and if you're black and look like you might be a Muslim, you might as well not show up on the street unless you want to draw the heat.
Do you think, though, that the heat of that would come out if there was also an equivalent list of these are the people, the descriptions of people that have done this, that and the other? You know, if someone has snatched your handbag, you're looking for someone that looks like the person that snatched your handbag.
Yeah.
And if the police say, well, I stopped them in that area because it was 5 minutes after I received this report and this was their description.
Yeah, and if the police said that to the person... No, Stella, if the police said that to the person that they were about to stop and search, or had stopped and were about to search, and then when they found that this person had nothing from a handbag about their person, said they were sorry in a civilized way, that would be less bruising than what currently happens. But let me make the point to you, and I accept it entirely. The police have a very hard job, and we all depend on the police, me as well as you, and we need to respect the police. But the police have to behave in a way that generates respect. Dan is on the line in Portsmouth. Let's hear from him. Go on, Dan.
Yeah, hi, George. Great show, by the way. I think you're doing a really good job, which upsets me because I tend to disagree with almost everything you say. Yes,
yeah, but maybe when you've heard more of what I actually say, you'll agree with me more. Go on, Dan.
I think you've done a good job, and I almost found myself agreeing with you. And then I thought this: when you said that you'd get the certain members of society on your side if you stop the stop and search, they come round, they cooperate, or that sort of stuff. I thought, well, that makes sense. And it probably would happen. Of course, it would happen, but it'd take a long time. It'd take a long time for that to happen, for ideas to dissolve and new ideas to form. And in that time, if you stop and search, and you know it ceases to be, you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to have people that do get stabbed and do get shot who may have not got shot or stabbed because they may have been stopped and searched in previous times. But if you just stop it, waiting for the utopia to take over, which I reckon it could happen, it could get better. There's a long time, a long crossover period where you could lose lives that could otherwise have been saved.
Yes, but almost all stop and search, Dan, yields nothing about stabbing or shooting.
I do agree with you as well about the police in the way they conduct themselves when they're doing a stop. I've been stopped and searched, and I do agree with you, but again, I find myself thinking about it, and I think one thing I've found as I've got older and my brushes with the law throughout the years, I've had a few, and I found that the more respectful you are with them, and the better you treat them, and the better you speak to them during whatever the process is, the better they treat you. And I think you know,
Well,
I'm just human.
I think that's
if you
right.
stand there with a bag of attitudes and you're giving them a load of abuse, which
Well,
young kids do nowadays.
No, that's true, Dan. That's true. But can I take a flying risk in speculating that you're a white man like me?
Oh, I am white, yeah.
Okay, so please take it from me that's easier said if you look like you and me than it is if you don't. That's easier to imagine that kind of discourse between you and the officer who's stopping and searching you than if you don't look like you or me. But thanks. It's been a pleasure arguing with you. Now I want your thoughts. What more can the police do to represent all of society? How much further do they need to go before you will trust them? Now, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, but we've got a weatherman, and quite a weatherman, coming up in the last hour. His name is Piers... I almost said Piers Morgan. His name is Piers Corbyn. Much more interesting than Piers Morgan. Steve Austin tweets, George Galloway is killing it on LBC. I used to despise him, but on the stereo, he is pure gold. And Steve is the $6 million man. And I have just got 2 Bob Dylan lyrics into one radio show. Doesn't happen. My question is this. Northampton police are to apologise to those they wrongfully stop and search, alongside removing an officer's power to do so if they abuse it. How much further do the police need to go before you will trust them? We had Lord Paddock on earlier. He was making the point that this change in Northampton has been driven by the oft despised police and crime commissioners, and he thought that vindicated the existence of that post. Maybe he's right. Dale is in Harrow and on the line. Go ahead, Dale.
Hello, it's a pleasure to speak to you, George. I've followed you for a long time and been excited that you've been given this platform to express your views and opinions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I think that they need to be heard. I'm a serving firefighter, serving black firefighter. I've been a fireman for over 11 years. And I've had many interactions with the police. I also brought up in the central London area, so I've also had many interactions with the police on that side of it. I got stopped countless amount of times by police. When I was younger, I used to take it quite bad, and because it was constant. Every other week he was getting stopped, every other week. And as I got older as a teenager, it kept happening. And then recently I was driving my car. My car's a highly tuned sports car. And I had a baseball cap on, which I like to wear. And I got pulled over by the police, and he was very aggressive, shouting and all sorts, telling me I had a broken tail light. My car's very expensive. I'm not going to drive with a broken tail light. Because I'm a firefighter now, I recognise the ranking system with the police. I then approached the sergeant. And because I'm very calm now, I started having a joke with him. And even he was laughing at the young police officer. A fire engine pulled up round the corner, and they saw who I was, and because I've obviously been a fireman, the firefighters jumped out and asked me if everything's okay. The sergeant then looked at me and said, why didn't you tell me he was a fireman? I would have let you go. And I asked him this one question. I said, why did I need to tell you I was a firefighter for me not to get stopped? I said, that shouldn't make a difference. I should be treated accordingly just because I'm a member of the public. So my views on it are quite mixed. I work closely with police officers, and there's sometimes that some of them are very excellent and their views are not. But it seems like when I take my uniform off and I leave my job and I maybe wearing a tracksuit, because I like to wear tracksuits and I train a lot, I tend to get stopped again. And I don't feel like I should have to always constantly remind them or tell them I'm an upstanding member of the community, or just because I'm a black person who likes to wear a baseball cap. And I think that their views are quite skewed, and they're gradually getting there because the younger police officers are coming through, and I think the younger generation, my generation of 30s, and that are changing things quite a bit. But I think it is predominantly a racist environment that the police officers work in, and they do try to do the best thing. But I think that they need to become more self-aware and more in touch with the community. And by doing that, the only way they could do that is by not doing as much stop and searching and interacting with the community a lot more.
Well, Dale, that's the best call of the day, of the week, in fact, and perfectly encapsulates the issue that we are dealing with here. I was reminded when you were talking of a wonderful cartoon when President Nelson Mandela, God rest his soul, went in a hackney carriage, a proper hackney carriage, horse and cart, down to Brixton. And the cartoon was a police officer pulling him over, saying, hello, 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 is this your vehicle, sir? And I played a game in London with my wife every time we were driving round late in the evening, as was our wont. If a car was pulled over, the chances were overwhelming that the driver was black. Now, Carl from Epsom is a police officer in a busy part of London. And he has a contrary view, and we need to hear it. Carl, welcome.
Hello.
Hi there, sir. Go ahead.
I'd just like to say, I work in a very busy part of London where the majority of crimes, i.e. things like robberies, are committed, or even people being found weapons on them, are committed by young black males between the ages of 15 to 24. Now, unfortunately, the basic description we will get is something along the lines of black male, teenager, 5'10", average build, wearing dark tracksuit bottoms or dark clothing. It's not a very good description, and we have to police basing on the information we're given. Now, if I go and stop a group who match that description, that's not me being racist. It's me actively trying to prevent some kind of crime happening. I get annoyed when I'm called racist because I'm doing my job. Now, I don't go out there deliberately wanting to stop a black male or cause grief to a black person. I go there because that's the information I've been given. Now, I've apologised countless times for when I've searched someone and it's been a negative result. I've shaken people's hands. But not only when they're polite to me, if they're giving me loads of abuse, then I'm not obviously going to try and build a rapport with them because they're not interested in it. I'll do my job and go on to the next call. But one thing I would like to say is, as we police based on intelligence and descriptions, things like that, you made a comment earlier about one of the callers being white and
having a better experience.
Yes. So what I'd like to say is, how many people have you got working in your office?
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right now.
4 people in front of me now.
Out of the males there, how would you describe yourself? Like you're a white male with grey hair or balding hair?
Yeah, both.
Now, you've got other males in there. Are they the same similar description? The point I'm trying to get at, white people have a lot different coloured hair, styles hair, and again, I'm not trying to racial profile here.
It's
but
kind of getting dodgy, Carl. You were doing fine up till then.
A lot of young black males.
But we're kind of edging into uncomfortable territory. So before you go any further, let me ask you a question.
George, I'm saying they've got short black hair. That's not me. That's not me being racist.
It's not the case that all black people have short black hair. But I don't want to go further down that road, Carl. I want to ask you something. Everything you said was perfectly proper. You are policing in an area where there's a lot of black people living and where a lot of crime is committed by black people. By the way, it's usually committed by black people on black people. And the approach that you had taken was perfectly proper, right down to the handshake and the countless apologies that you've issued. But you added the caveat that if you were getting attitude from the person you were stopping and searching, you didn't say sorry and you didn't shake hands. A bit of attitude. Can't you see how this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Also, on the flip side of that, I'd be thinking, what am I doing?
I'm being black and I'm on the street. That's what you're doing. Well, I'm being black with short hair on the street. That's all I'm doing.
It's easy to make those kind of comments when you're not living in the real world.
I do live in the real world, and I represented a constituency in the East End of London which had a very large number of black people. And I represented a constituency in the north of England which had a very large number of black people. And you have to hear me when I tell you how it looks from their standpoint. You've got to be able to walk in the other guy's shoes, Carl, if you're going to be in your line of work and mine.
Right, okay, I understand what you're saying, but my point of view, if I'm being constantly targeted, then I'd maybe think to myself, maybe I'm doing something to attract unwanted attention.
But they're not if you didn't find anything on them, Carl. The only thing they were doing was being on the street and being black.
No, there's a little bit more to it than that.
Well, there isn't, is there? If you pull somebody over, stop and search them, and you don't find anything on them, then you stopped and searched the wrong guy. And if you keep doing that and don't expect an attitude to develop, then frankly, you're not thinking right.
Well, okay, I understand what you're saying, but this is intelligence-led stop and searching. It's not just pointing out a black man on the street and searching them.
Well, you did stop and search them by your own account because
Yes.
they were young, black, with short hair and wearing dark clothes. Yeah. Now
Because they
you got
fit the
the wrong
description which was
you
given-
got the wrong young, black, short-haired, black-clad youth, and you seem not to grasp. You say you do grasp, but you don't actually. I don't feel it, man. You don't. You don't seem to grasp why that person, repeatedly stopped and searched, would begin to get an attitude about you. Well, Carl's gone. Go to Philip in Beckenham. Go ahead, Philip.
Hi, good morning. I was telling your man that because I'm disabled, I get stopped quite often myself. I mean, I was only stopped last week because I came out of my property, walked from the door to my car, and as the police van went past, when they pulled me, they said they thought that I was either drunk or on drugs. So they followed me down the road, pulled me over. They said, clearly you're not on anything, you're driving very well. Kept me there for 15 minutes doing checks, one thing and another. And I said to the police officer after we'd finished, he said, I'm really, really sorry about that. I said, look, I understand. I said, my condition, I understand why the police, you have to pull me, do your job. I'm not angry. It doesn't bother me, okay? I said, but what bothers me is, I said, if you pulled me and you gave me a card or a slip from yourselves, the police, I said, so if you pulled me in a week's time, I could just show you the slip and that would save you 15 minutes of your time. I said, and I, quite frankly, I think that would work with the locals, because if they're constantly pulling the people again and again and again that live in the local area, no wonder they're getting angry, because if they're not criminals and they're not known as criminals, then the police have to have a way of identifying so they can stop harassing them. And if they just show them the card and they say, OK, fine, you're not a criminal, you're not known by the police, they can move on, and it saves them at least 15 minutes of their time, and then that young person doesn't get stressed.
Good point, Philip, and well made. How about this one from Met BPA, who says drug use is twice as prevalent amongst non-blacks, but blacks are up to 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs. Moreover, if they're found with cannabis, they are many times more likely to be charged than a white person found with cannabis. If charged, they are many times more likely to be convicted than a white person charged with possession of cannabis. And if they are convicted, they are many times more likely to be jailed for possession than those who are not black. These are facts. Now, I think they're uncomfortable facts for many. We had Carl, the police officer, who I must say was on fairly thin ice on one or two of the parts of his conversation with me. And we had a black fireman who drives a sports car, and many people are now asking for his telephone number, who told us, like it is, if you are black in a sports car, you're quite likely to be pulled over. And when they know that you're a firefighter, they say, well, why didn't you tell us you were a firefighter? We wouldn't have stopped and searched you. Gary in Walthamstow is making that point. Go ahead, Gary.
Good morning, George.
Good morning.
I'll just give you a little bit of my credentials. I worked for a local government, London Borough, for 24 years, and so I used to do a lot of work with the police in preventing crime on our estates.
Yeah.
My brother also works for the National Crime Agency. I have a niece that's a superintendent in Newham, and a couple of my friends are DCI. And I've also been out on a shout at Streatham Police Station with a police unit. So I know the process very well. And I think what Carl, I think it was missing the point. What I'm saying is I've got no problem in dealing with anyone that's black or green or pink that's a criminal and they're identified as a criminal, or they're carrying out criminal intentions, being stopped and searched. The problem that I have, if you take the average white person in Surrey, where crime was also committed, they are not indiscriminately stopped. So an 18, 19-year-old respectable young white chap that walks down the street doesn't get stopped at the same amount of time as, say, my son.
No, not remotely. Not remotely.
And I can give you an example that only happened 4 weeks ago. My son is home from university. He's studying in Sussex. He's 19. He's black, obviously. He went to Oxford Street just recently to do some shopping with a colleague of his who's mixed race. They were stopped by the police saying that there was a fracas outside of Gap. When identified, no, it wasn't them. The police officer then went on to say that my son had an ASBO, which obviously he doesn't. I rang the police and made I didn't make a complaint. I wanted to speak to the officer. I was put through to the Met Police. The desk sergeant or whoever it was said, look, yeah, I understand your complaint and I'll ask the officer to ring you. Now, if my son had an ASBO, surely they would now have to know specifically that that's the individual, because if he's breaching his ASBO, they would arrest him.
Yeah.
Now, he then said, well, the officer wasn't sure if it was him that actually had the ASBO. And I think, well, it was just... And he tried to defend... he did apologise in the end and said he was very sorry about it. But my point is, I consider myself an upstanding, respectable citizen. I've brought my children up in exactly the same way. And I just find it offensive that my son is stopped simply because he's black. And there is no discrimination in saying, well, some officers just look at it, you're black, so therefore you are a criminal. That's it, period.
Well, it's not just morally repugnant. It is entirely counterproductive for a police service or a police force. It's entirely counterproductive because it makes enemies of a community that you need to have on your side in the fight against criminals, black or white. It is foolish as well as knavish. That's my point, Gary. Thanks for your call. Jack is in Whitechapel. Go ahead, Jack.
Good morning, George. I live in Roma Road, which is...
I know it well.
Yes. So I was walking along just last Saturday when the market was on, and then two police officers in uniform were running, and then one of them just from behind grabbed me by the arm. Yeah, so I was startled. Then he says, just hold there for a second, fella. And I said, what for? And then about 20 seconds later, radio came through saying, oh, no, it's the wrong suspect. And then he goes, oh, this one's not out of breath anyway, so he's not been running. And then they let go of me, and before I could ask any questions, they run off down the street. No apologies, no nothing whatsoever, just because I fitted the description of someone that they were chasing. Obviously, I am a young black male. I'm 29 years old. I've never been in trouble with the police. I've never been arrested. I've been stopped before. But this is in my own community where there's people watching thinking, oh, this guy's not a young, respected person. He just got stopped by the police. They don't know it. They feel like, and it just annoys you and it really upsets you just to think that you've been stopped. So obviously, I went home thinking about it. So I now sent an email to the local police station via their Twitter. Do you think I've received anything back? No. They just don't care, and it's racism in your face. And it's just like, I've grown up in Tower Hamlets all my life, and I've got white friends, Asian friends that don't get stopped the number of times I've been stopped. So when is the Met going to change? In my opinion, never.
Jack, you've made powerful points, and the idea that this does not alter you or people like you's attitude to the police is just ridiculous. Any police officer listening must know that that is true. Well, let me go from Bethnal Green to Bow, where Mo is on the line. Go ahead, Mo.
Hey, George. I want to say, George, well done for, again, bringing up this really toxic subject for Londoners and stuff. And I totally agree with the firefighter I was speaking earlier on. I'm also a London firefighter, and I've had the same experiences as he's had, where when you're in uniform and stuff, they're your best mate and they'll talk to you and they're nice and sort of judging you like that. And then the minute you're out of uniform, you are treated so differently. And the difference I've noticed when I'm on my own and stuff and with other black friends, the way they treat you then in a stop and search and how they talk to you and how they sort of lie about their powers and what they can actually do to you, abusing their position, compared to when you're with English people and stuff. So I go out with a white girl, is my fiance and stuff, who I love, adore, and whenever I go out with her, how she gets spoken to is so different. And same for my other white mates and that, guys, when I'm out with them, they're spoken to as, sir, can you do this? Sir, can you do that? When they're talking to them. Whereas as a young black man, I have always, unless I'm wearing my operational fire kit or in my uniform and that, always spoken to like as if you almost have to like sort of cower to them, almost that if you don't do as they say, they're going to arrest you for absolutely nothing. They'll make things up and that. So it's a really toxic subject, and the dangers of not sorting it as shown, as you discussed, is things like the black community has sort of like does not trust the police whatsoever, and you're never ever going to improve that unless you start sort of challenging things like stop and search. And if you do, what you would get is support from the black community. So if there are criminals, if something does happen, if a murder does happen, if there are drug dealers, the black community will shop these people and help with things like that. And also, it's dangerous. You saw the riots and stuff. What happened with the riots? And
it's very dangerous, and it's not just toxic, Mo. If I can mix my metaphors, it's already evident that it is a real iceberg, only the tip of which is visible. I'm not going to give you the telephone number now because, frankly, I can't take any more calls. I've got so many calls, tweets, emails, texts. They're coming in floods here. This is a gigantic subject, and anyone, especially in London, but not only in London, who doesn't recognise it as a problem, is either fooling themselves or worse. Now, the truth is, Macpherson found institutionalised racism in the Metropolitan Police. Mr. Hogan Howe said just a week or 2 weeks ago that the Met still had a problem with race. And it's abundantly clear from this discussion that that problem is even bigger, perhaps, than the Commissioner imagined. Now, I spent 36 years in the Labour Party, and I've lived through many leadership battles. But this one just got personal. The action of Yvette Cooper in pulling out dramatically moments before she was going on the radio, going on the sofa set television on ITV, tells me that something big is going on, and I'm going to be looking into it. Now, my first Labour leadership campaign was in 1978, and I've been involved in one way or another in every one ever since. And I'm telling you, this one is about to go ballistic. It's about to go nuclear. It's that serious. The future of Labour. What's going to happen next? You'll hear my intelligent speculation. But you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, but it's always good to have one. And Piers Corbyn is the best weatherman I know. And he's coming in too. You see, when I got into the station early this morning, that Yvette Cooper had pulled out, I think 1 minute before she was to go on the air with my colleague Lisa Aziz, my esteemed colleague, whom I've known for many years, and I'm very glad to be working now in the same building with her. And when I learned, if she'll forgive me, even more dramatically, that Yvette Cooper had pulled out of an appearance on the sofa on Good Morning Britain on ITV, a televised piece that would have been seen by many, but would have been seen throughout the day and evening by many, many more. Well, I remember that old saw, I think it might be biblical, that a cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of great storms to come. I think she's up to something. You see, the claim was illness, but if you're ill, you know before 1 minute to go to airtime. If you're ill and you're in a leadership campaign and the ballot papers are already on people's dining room tables and being filled in, you have to be pretty ill to pull out of such a high-profile series of events. In fact, the only illness that would keep you off the air would be vomiting. The danger of vomiting on television being distinctly a vote loser is definitely there. So I don't know what illness is being claimed, but I suspect that it's a diplomatic illness. So what could come next? Well, one possibility, obviously, is that she was prone to a vomiting sickness and therefore, understandably, pulled out. The second possibility is that she's about to pull out of the leadership race. And the third possibility is that if she's going to pull out of the leadership race, she's not doing so in defeat, but in defiance. if she is about to pull out of the leadership contest, what might that defiance look like? Well, I've lived through that period too. After Michael Foot succeeded James Callaghan, after the obvious stramash that accompanied it, I realised that anything can happen inside the Labour Party. And what happened then was that leaders of the party, the Gang of Four, Lord Jenkins, whom I defeated, knocked out of Parliament in 1987, Roy Jenkins, as was, Shirley Williams, Bill Rogers, and Dr. David Owen, who was the Foreign Secretary in the Callaghan government, they left the party and formed their own. Now that never prospered, and eventually they merged with the Liberals to become the Liberal Democrats. And that hasn't prospered either, as the vanishingly small number of Liberal Democrat MPs in Parliament can testify, and the virtual wipeout of Liberal Democrat councillors in recent local government elections and European Parliament elections makes clear that hasn't prospered either. Now that's a very chilling reminder or warning to would-be breakaways from the Labour Party. But as I said on Saturday, Diane Abbott disagreed with me, and she may be right, she often is, that there was no prospect of a breakaway from the Labour Party. I've still had a lingering suspicion, and here it is, that if you, in the middle of a leadership campaign, are talking so apocalyptically about the dangers, existential dangers, that exist for your party if the most likely winner actually wins, then you must have a game plan. You must have somewhere to go. You must be planning on doing something, unless you're planning on retirement. And I don't think Yvette Cooper is yet old enough in any way to retire. Now, we learned in the splash in the Daily Telegraph yesterday that Lord Mandelson, who we hadn't really heard from, we'd heard from Blair, we'd heard from his amanuensis Alistair Campbell, we'd heard from Alan Johnson, we'd heard from all kinds of people, Jack Straw, of the apocalypse which awaits Labour and the country if Jeremy Corbyn wins, but we hadn't heard from Lord Mandelson. His was the shoe that hadn't dropped, the dog which hadn't barked. And we learned yesterday on the front of the Daily Telegraph why. Because he's been working behind the scenes to try to wreck the election, to try to abort the process. It has not been denied, has been trying to get all three of the candidates standing against Corbyn to pull out of the contest and thus illegitimise it, thus abort the electoral process. Of course, it was pointed out to him that actually, if that happened, Jeremy Corbyn would be declared the winner by default. But that's not a reason necessarily why it wouldn't happen. It's quite clear that Andy Burnham has no intention of pulling out, but that doesn't mean Liz Kendall and Yvette Cooper might not. And if they do, what lies ahead? Let me tell you, so you've heard it here first, that there's two options. One is the half-in, half-out option. And it looks like this, that when Parliament resumes, after Jeremy Corbyn has won a landslide victory, the Parliamentary Labour Party elects its own leader and says that that leader is the leader of the opposition. Jeremy Corbyn can be the leader of the Labour Party, OK. But Mr. or Ms. X is now the leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and they would argue, therefore, the leader of the opposition. Now that would be a recipe for a great storm inside the Labour Party. It would be an affront to the democratic process. It would be a calculated insult to the 610,000 members and supporters of the Labour Party who had just voted in an election. But it's not quite yet a breach. It's not quite yet the formation of a new party. And the second option is not half in, half out, but absolutely out. And that's, if you like, the zero option. It's the nuclear option. A party led by Tony Blair, David Miliband, with the money that Blair can bring to the table, declaring that it will not accept the decision of the Labour Party to elect Jeremy Corbyn as its leader, and a new party being born, perhaps called the Democratic Party, just like the United States, so beloved of many of them. These are two real possible options. Both of them would be very bad news for the Labour Party. Both of them would be very bad news for democracy, but both of them have to be faced as a possibility. Now, all of this might be speculation built like a sandcastle in the air. It might be that Yvette Cooper produces a doctor's line at some point today that shows the perfectly good and valid health reason she had for not appearing in the media today. It might not. I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of speculation, because when I was in the tea room in the House of Commons on the day, on the hour almost, that the late John Smith, the late and great John Smith, died, I can tell you that not one person in that tea room imagined anything other than that Gordon Brown would become the new Labour leader. And then people looked around and they said, "Where's Mandelson? Mandelson's missing. Where is he? We'd have expected him to be here in the tea room, pressing the flesh, pressing the case for Gordon Brown, with whom he'd worked like a hand in glove all these years in preparation for this hour." But Mandelson was missing, and we now know why he was missing. He was missing because he was ensconced with Tony Blair, preparing to betray their mutual friend Gordon Brown, to stab him in the back. That's what they did. And as news spread in that tea room over subsequent hours, not many hours, wasn't long before we knew, but I can tell you the shock on the faces of my fellow Labour MPs was absolutely enormous. It became clear that an almost biblical betrayal was underway, and Gordon Brown actually never recovered from it. He really didn't. He never recovered from his best friend, his roommate, stabbing him in the back. He never recovered from Peter Mandelson's role in that betrayal. It was biblical. And speaking of biblical, what does the Labour Party have with brothers? Well, Ed and David is one thing. Jeremy and Piers is another. Piers Corbyn is one of the world's best left field weather forecasters. He's one of the most innovative and creative individuals looking at the environment and weather, which is a mirror or a canary in a cage for the environment. And I'm going to be talking to him in the course of the next show. Lulu in Chelsea says, George Galloway's just converted me to rail nationalisation. I'm worried now that listening to him for an hour could convince me of almost anything. Stay tuned, Lulu. You never know where this is going. And by the way, if Katie Hopkins is in the building, can someone stop and search her? Because she's just threatened to lamp me as a commie git. Katie, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a commie. Now, Theo Usherwood, who's our wise political editor, wise beyond his years, I may say, is joining me now because I want to ask him what's happening with the Labour candidates today. Theo.
Yes, good morning, George. Now, the issue today is who will stand aside. Will it be Yvette Cooper or Andy Burnham if they are to unite their votes to stop Jeremy Corbyn? Now, this story started last night when Yvette Cooper's team issued a statement from a spokeswoman from that team urging Andy Burnham to stand aside, saying that he was flip-flopping on issues, and actually now was the time just to let Yvette take charge of the Stop Corbyn campaign and urge his supporters to instead back Yvette Cooper, and therefore that would stand the greatest chance of reining Jeremy Corbyn in. And that prompted a response from Andy Burnham's team. They called it a surprising and desperate stunt when I spoke to them this morning, and they also said that they thought that the statement from Yvette was straight out of the Ed Balls playbook, because of course Yvette Cooper is married to the former Shadow Chancellor. And then that came back, Yvette Cooper's team came back with a hit back with another claim, saying that line about Ed being straight out of Ed Balls' playbook was actually a sexist jibe. And so it's all descended, it's all become rather ugly. You'll remember a few weeks ago, all of the candidates agreed that not to turn to sort of personal abuse, to try and keep it clean, to not bring the party's leadership campaign into disrepute. And so, yes, that's where we're up to at the moment. It all seems to have turned rather ugly.
But what about the pulling out of very important media dates with minutes to spare by Yvette Cooper? What do you have on that?
Well, Yvette Cooper's team are insisting it was just simply because she was unwell, and therefore she couldn't make those early morning media rounds, and that she will be doing stuff later on today, media interviews, but they will be pre-recorded, i.e. they won't be live. So there's obviously some issue. They're saying there's some issue. She's unwell at the moment. Andy Burnham's team saying they don't know anything they don't know anything about Yvette Cooper pulling out at the moment. But of course now is the time to do it. If one candidate is to step aside, now is the time to do it, because the ballot papers have just been sent out.
They're already out. I know people who've already voted.
And they're already out. So if you were to do it in 3 weeks' time when everybody's sent their ballot papers back, it'd be pointless. It just wouldn't work. So now is the time to do it.
We're now... this is the zero-sum game argument. When you have denounced your fellow candidates in the terms, never mind Jeremy Corbyn, we've now got Yvette Cooper and Liz Kendall attacking Andy Burnham almost as fiercely as they're attacking Jeremy Corbyn. So you begin to get a kind of disintegrative effect that no one is... I mean, Andy Burnham's not going to do anything to please Yvette Cooper after all that Yvette Cooper has said about him, and vice versa.
And of course, George, you can't then turn around after you've criticised somebody so heavily, you've attacked somebody so heavily, and then turn around to your supporters and say, actually, this is the right person to back.
Exactly.
It becomes impossible.
Absurd. Yeah. Well, I personally think it's heading into very deep waters that we haven't yet glimpsed the depth of, but may, by the end of the day or tomorrow, glimpse it. And I smell, no disrespect, Peter, you actually smell very nicely of Paco Rabanne. I smell Peter Mandelson in this picture. We know from the Telegraph yesterday that he's been trying to get people to stand down. Peter Mandelson is a man who operates in the corridors with soft shoes, hush puppies. He creeps around, and he's very, very effective. Are you picking up any trace of him?
Peter Mandelson wants something a little bit different. Peter Mandelson wants them all to stand, the other three candidates, Liz Kendall, Andy Burnham and Yvette Cooper, to stand down, simply to declare the race null and void. And then, of course, that for any change to happen, you'd have to change the rules, because, of course, there's a lot of heat on Ed Miliband at the moment. He's jetted off to Australia on a family holiday, and a lot of people within the parliamentary party, at least, are criticising him because he was the one who changed the rules that allowed people to vote in this way.
I heard you say that, and I read other people saying it, but let me, if I may, issue a mild correction. Actually, they all changed the rules. All of them welcomed Ed Miliband's reform. Every one of these candidates, every one of the shadow cabinet, every one of the Labour leaders, and every one of the political pundits. But all of them supported it.
But Paul Kenny from the GMB did warn that it would create this effect where anybody could vote, and that you'd have the issues that you have now. There were warnings from the sidelines, although I take your point, George, that at the time, the main...
Well, it all seemed like a great wheeze, you see, to take power away from the trade unions by those who have wanted all along to sever the link between trade unions and the Labour Party. All seemed like a good idea at the time. And now they have 610,000 people voting, already started voting. And so I'm putting to you, I'd appreciate it if you tested it in amongst your contacts, that at the very least what's going to happen is that the irreconcilables are going to try somehow to declare the Parliamentary Labour Party, that is to say Labour MPs, a kind of unilateral declaration of independence and say, well, Jeremy Corbyn's the leader of the Labour Party, that's fine, he can go around the rubber chicken circuit raising money for the next election and so on. But the parliamentary strategy and the parliamentary tactics will be determined by the MPs, amongst whom Jeremy Corbyn has very little support. I call that a half-in, half-out option. The worst option, of course, is an outright split. You still think that an outright split is unlikely?
I can't see the party splitting as things currently stand, but that may change. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, what is interesting is that there does seem, you know it from having operated outside of Westminster and, of course, being an MP, that often we talk about this Westminster bubble, and you have this group of MPs who often, in fact, seem completely disassociated from either their grassroots or even the wider public. And that does seem to have happened here, where you have the bulk of the parliamentary party. You know, they only let Jeremy Corbyn in just to open up the debate, just to please the grassroots. And now they're turning around with their arms up in the air saying, well, actually, the grassroots want Jeremy Corbyn, and there's nothing that we can do. The other fear and the other reason that, of course, they're claiming that this race needs to be rerun, and it's not just Peter Mandelson who's saying that it needs to be, who wants the whole thing called off, is that the fact that many people, there are Tories who are looking to try and influence the outcome of the race. I've seen one Tory activist today tweet a picture of himself in front of 3 Labour Party ballot papers, each with a tick in the Jeremy Corbyn column and then no second preferences. And there are a lot of Labour commentators who are very unhappy that they see the race as being manipulated in this way. But Theo, in an electorate of 610,000, you're going to get glitches. But they are very, very small. I mean, the idea, I can tell you after a lifetime in left-wing politics, that you could fit all the Trotskyites in Britain into a single gymnasium. They have not all joined the Labour Party, and even if they did, they would be a mere grain of sand compared to the 610,000 people who have joined. And the Labour Party went into this system with their eyes open, thinking it was a terrific wheeze, as I said earlier. And it's too late for them to try and change the rules now, at least without everything blowing up in their faces. I certainly agree with that, George. And like I said at the beginning, the only way it can be changed is if the whole thing's called off, and that's what Lord Mandelson wanted to do, to call the whole thing off and then change the rules. But
it wouldn't have happened that way, of course. But
the grassroots, there'd be a furore if that happened. I mean, the grassroots would throw their arms up in the air and claim foul play, and you can't see that happening. What will happen? I'm not going to be one to predict the outcome of this Labour leadership election, but if there is going to be a change, if somebody from the centre right, the right of the party, the centre ground of the party is going to come back in, then that will probably have to happen in 2018, and whether that and the changes will then have to happen over that period of time to change the rules. But whether that will happen, nobody knows.
Thanks for that, Theo Usherwood, very wise political editor of LBC. After the news headlines, I'll be talking to the brother of the man taking the Labour Party by storm. OK, here's my question. Can Labour survive a leadership battle which is bitter and personal, as this one is turning out to be? Perhaps you don't agree that it's that bitter, that personal. I think it has turned in the last few days as 2 things became clear. The first was that Jeremy Corbyn was winning by a landslide. And I mean a landslide. I'm talking 65, maybe even 70% of the vote. Let me just analyse those that joined on the very last day that they could join. That was, I think, last Wednesday. 164,000 people joined the Labour Party in a single day. And here's my prediction, that 95% of them did so in order to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. Anyone who was enthused to join the Labour Party to vote for, say, Liz Kendall or Yvette Cooper or even Andy Burnham would have done so long ago, and precious few of those there would be. The idea that 164,000 people joined on the last day to vote for Yvette Cooper is frankly fanciful. So, in my view, Jeremy Corbyn is winning this with a landslide. And the second thing that's become clear is that it was impossible for the other contenders to agree who was the stronger amongst them to stand up against Jeremy. And that's where the bitterness and the personal is coming in. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn is being subjected to quite horrific media distortion, misrepresentation, insult, in fact, defamation. What is going to happen next in the Labour leadership contest? I know Jeremy Corbyn very, very well. I have known him for more than 30 years. In fact, if I think about it, I've known him for more than 35 years. I know what he is, and I know what he isn't. He's not an extremist. He's not any kind of crazed communist or any other kind of ist. He is a guy who believes in what he believes, tells you what he believes, doesn't change his beliefs because you're asking him to change them. He sees his role as being one of persuading you of what he believes, which seems to me to be what politics is about. You see, I can't speak for him. Let me speak for myself. What would be the point in me persuading you to vote for me by pretending that I believed what you believed? Because if I don't believe what you believed, what's the point in you voting for me? What's the point in me getting office based on a false prospectus? There's only any point in me being in office if I'm able to do what I believe needs to be done. That's my point. That's Jeremy's point. He believes we need to bring the railways into public ownership. There's therefore no point in him pretending that he believes otherwise, because that would be both dishonest and pointless. Sandra in Muswell Hill. Sandra, welcome.
Good morning, George. I agree with you totally about Jeremy Bowen. I've met him during the Stop the War coalition, and I find him a totally believable, honest man who, as you say, doesn't swing with the wind, which is wonderful. And that's why we're all voting for him. You know, he speaks our language. He's an honest guy. He stands up and says what he believes, and that's so unusual that we all fall over. And then when we get up again, we want to vote for Jeremy. But as far as what would happen to the Labour Party, I think that it will happen as it always does. You hitch your wagon to the star. You know, it doesn't matter whether they agree with Jeremy, don't agree with Jeremy. They want to be on the winning team. So I think all sorts of people will change their point of view.
I think that's true of the majority of members of Parliament, but the leading members of Parliament, or people who regard themselves as leading, who have been attacking Corbyn with a vehemence which seems to suggest they'll not be continuing business as usual. There's a fellow called Liam Byrne, for example, most famous for having left an idiotic note in 2010, which the Tories then used for 5 long years, saying there's no money left. Do you remember him?
I do.
He said in the newspapers this morning that the Labour Party will be destroyed if Jeremy Corbyn is the leader. Now, you can't say that the party's destroyed if Jeremy Corbyn is the leader and then carry on in the Labour Party as if nothing had happened when he does become the leader.
But, you know, it's an extraordinary thing, George. The people who are trying to pull him down are the kind of people we'd run a marathon to get away from. Peter Mandelson, for instance. I think the minute Peter Mandelson opens his mouth, the rest of us run for cover. Tony Blair, the same thing. the people who are speaking up for Jeremy, like you. I mean, I'm not. I know that you're an independent, but what you're saying about Jeremy is what we all believe. Those are the people who I hope will rally together to make a Labour Party that is worth voting for.
Very well put and well spoken, Sandra in Muswell Hill. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I completely agree that some of the things that are being said about Jeremy Corbyn are not just dishonest, they're actually defamatory.
Mm-hmm.
And
Definitely.
I would cite particularly Channel 4 News' attack on him last night.
Despicable.
Which I didn't think that any broadcaster would ever broadcast.
Let alone Channel 4 News.
Yeah, sorry?
Let alone Channel 4 News.
Well,
mind you, it was done by the reporter. It was, Robert, it was done by the reporter who falsely claimed that she'd been thrown out of a mosque, when in fact she was very kindly directed to the mosque that she had intended to visit, rather than the one that she'd stumbled into by mistake. But it was quite the lowest interview I have ever seen on any British news bulletin.
Well, not just the interview, the entire piece was beyond the pale. And really, somebody should talk to Jeremy and get him to sue. But the other thing is that not only is he being viciously defamed, but reasonable scrutiny of the other candidates is not taking place.
No, because their campaigns have become not about themselves, but about Jeremy Corbyn. They're not talking about themselves. Everything they talk about is how disastrous it'll be if Jeremy Corbyn wins.
Yeah, they have no real vision for a better Britain and a better world. Jeremy does. That's why he's getting support. But, you know, I mean, I did want to say something about the record of Blairite Burnham, because when he was a health minister in 2007, he told community mental health trusts to stop helping people so much, and he said if they've got a long-term problem that isn't getting any better, just discharge them. So basically a lot of people who can't even look after themselves are just being left to slowly die.
Well, I can't comment on that, Robert. I don't know about it. And I wouldn't myself characterise Andy Burnham as a Blairite, but then everyone has a different definition of that. Thanks for your call. I'm talking about the situation which has emerged in the last hours. We haven't got clarity on it yet. Yvette Cooper's people are continuing to insist that she pulled out of very important media interviews this morning on LBC and on ITV's Good Morning Britain. But the reason was illness, although rather paradoxically she's going to be better later in the day when she's going to do other media interviews. I may be wrong, but I smell something happening, because I've been across this course several times before. I was involved in the Labour leadership election in 1978, when my old friend Harold Wilson unexpectedly stepped down. I was involved in the Labour election when Michael Foot stood for leader on the retirement of James Callaghan. I was involved in the Labour leadership election when Neil Kinnock became the leader, when John Smith became the leader, and when, of course, Tony Blair became the leader, though I didn't vote for him. After the travel news, I'm going to be talking to the brother of the man taking the country by storm. It's Piers Corbyn, who isn't actually able to vote for Jeremy, even though he's his brother. What is it between the Labour Party and brothers? I don't know. He's not able to vote because he was denied a vote. I'm sure his vote will not be necessary in the end, any more than my non-vote will be noticed, because I can't vote either, even though I've spent my entire life in Labour movement politics. Now, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, but if you've got one on hand, and he is not only one of the world's most creative, innovative, and left-field weathermen, and he's the brother of what I think think is, by common consent, likely to be the next leader of the Labour Party, next leader of Her Majesty's opposition, why would you pass the opportunity up? And I haven't. I'm joined by Piers Corbyn. Now, Piers, like me, you'll not be voting in this contest, even though you are the brother. It's almost biblical, Labour and the brothers.
Well, I would vote for him if I could.
You would, unlike Ed Miliband, who stood against his brother. But you're not able to vote, and we'll come to the reasons why in a minute. I want to, as I've got you here, as the managing director of weatheraction.com, of which I'm a fan, ever since I interviewed you some years ago.
Oh, yes.
I am interested in why you think this August has been so weird and bizarre in weather terms, and whether that tells us which way the wind is blowing, and what's the bank holiday going to be like?
Well, first of all, it's been a lacklustre summer and a definitely lacklustre August, because the jet stream, that is basically the track of low-pressure systems crossing the Atlantic towards the British Isles, the jet stream has been further south than normal, and also the mid-Atlantic is cold. So the west winds coming in are cold, and it's just a lousy August. However, and this position of the jet stream is caused by solar activity, and we can predict it months ahead. And months ahead, we predicted there would be some switching of the jet stream just before bank holiday, and in fact we forecast 6 months ago that this bank holiday is going to be definitely the best part of the summer for the United Kingdom and Ireland.
Corbyn predicts the best bank holiday
for years.
Yes. There's a headline. A pre-election promise made by Mr. Corbyn.
Yes.
P. Corbyn.
Okay.
But is all of this not to do with climate change? Now, I know you don't deny climate change. Mm-hmm. You deny who's responsible or what's responsible for climate change. Explain that.
Exactly so. Well, first of all, the idea that man-made carbon dioxide is controlling the climate is absurd, because of the total amount of carbon dioxide that comes in and out of the sea every day, or the general sea and land, only 4% of it is from mankind. So the other 96% is not mankind. So if mankind is in charge, somehow the termites, which produce 10 times the CO2 of mankind, for example, have to do what mankind is doing and follow suit, which of course is a complete insanity. It's completely absurd. The other thing is that the question is, does CO2 anyway drive climate? The answer is no, it does not. And there's a million years of data which show that it's not CO2 which controls temperature, but it's temperatures, namely of the sea, which control CO2 levels.
Now, just before I segue, I mean, I could say, is the sun shining this August on your brother, but I'm not going to right at this point.
Well, it certainly will on bank holiday.
Because I want you to tell me about the reasons why you're not able to vote. You're a housing activist.
Correct.
You campaign against whomsoever from whichever party.
Absolutely.
Is making life worse for people in terms of their housing.
Yes.
How did that end up by you being forbidden to vote for your brother in the election?
Right. Well, I left the Labour Party in 2002 because I stood against Labour. I stopped being a Labour organiser, which I'd been for 6 years in Bermondsey, Southwark. I stood against Labour in 2002 on the Aylesbury estate issue because we believed the council were about to renege on the promise, following a ballot, that they would keep the whole estate as council housing. They came to the election and said they wouldn't, including Harriet Harman, so they wouldn't privatise. It was untrue. They did privatise, as you know. I stood again in 2002 in a ward by Elephant and Castle, Chaucer Ward, with the warning that there's redevelopment happening everywhere. The Haygate estate nearby has just been smashed and there was no council housing built there, so you people should look out. And I stood against Labour and all the other parties under the slogan "Stop Social Cleansing." And this obviously upset the Labour Party, and therefore they said I'm not allowed to vote or become even a registered supporter during this leadership election.
Yeah, it seems a bit harsh. given that we've got someone in the papers this morning, a Tory activist, posing with 3 ballot papers. Seems a bit harsh.
Yes.
But
well, I think they should welcome me and others who want to come back to the Labour Party for genuine reasons.
greater is the rejoicing in heaven of the sinner who doth repent.
Well, of course.
I mean, it's obvious, but we'll come to that in a minute. But does it worry you that if Jeremy gets the job, that you will come under pressure and scrutiny in a way that might be damaging for you or damaging for him or both?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, the media, newspapers are phoning me up all the time about all sorts of completely stupid questions, and I spend some time denying their allegations, and then they print them as if they were true anyway. So, what I am doing now is refusing all calls from 90% of newspapers anyway, because you can't check what
I've known Jeremy well for 35 years or more, so I know about his adult character. But what was he like growing up? What was he like as a boy?
Well, he was fine. He was my younger brother, so we'd fool around, ride bikes, play in sand pits. He was into motor cars and I was into science. So, I built a weather station in the garden. He was interested in that, but he did other things. Oh, he made a sundial. I remember that. He made a sundial. And he was into old cars and racing cars and a fan of Stirling Moss.
And yet he's now never off a bike.
That's absolutely true. Well, we rode a lot of bikes in those days, but I don't ride them in London because I think it's a bit daft you filling yourself up with diesel fumes.
Now, your parents were political.
They
were. Of course, like mine, and that's how we, in a way, got into these events, these things.
Yes, absolutely.
But did it ever, I mean, it's a cliche, but did you ever imagine that your brother might be Her Majesty's leader of the loyal opposition?
Well, no, I didn't. And I don't think he did until quite recently. We were both very active politically. I mean, I was more to the left than him, and I was in the, supported Communist Party, Trotskyist groups and so forth, whereas he was always in the Labour Party only.
He's a mainstream Labour man.
Well, absolutely. And my parents were both Labour people. I mean, they had leftish leanings. And they were also scientists. All my brothers and the parents are scientists or engineers, apart from Jeremy, who's a politician. But
he's a social engineer, a political engineer.
He goes along with evidence. You've got to have evidence-based decision-making, as you have to act in science. And I think his views on proper discussion in the Labour Party are absolutely crucial. And a new way of nationalisation involving proper participation from the public is fundamental. And it's different from the old total top-down Stalinist approach that we've had in the past.
Indeed. Now, of course, if he wins, he'll be facing David Cameron on the first Wednesday after that at Prime Minister's questions. Let me ask you the big question first.
My God.
Will he wear a tie, do you think?
Pass. I don't know. Interesting. Maybe not. But I don't know. I haven't discussed.
What should his first question be to David Cameron?
Well, I think he should decide his first question. But a question I would have for David Cameron would be, do you think it's right that the British economy should be regarded as succeeding when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? If austerity is increasing the rich-poor gap and making the top 1% even richer, then this isn't a way forward and it's unsustainable. It can't go on forever. So what are you going to do about it, Mr. Cameron?
Now, you're a forecaster. What's your forecast for the result of the Labour leadership election, Mr. Corbyn?
Jeremy will win by a wide margin. Say, at least 30% ahead of his nearest rival.
That's my prediction. That's my forecast. He'll get at least 60. He may get 70% of the vote. Yeah. He may even get a little more than 70%. Yeah. That'll be sunshine.
It will be, yeah, absolutely.
Piers Corbyn, thank you very much indeed.